Fortune-telling, soothsaying, divination. We have always sought a way to look into the future in order to guarantee some semblance of certainty, especially during times when certainty itself has been called into question. Whether you're partial to reading tea leaves, the lines of your palm, scattered runes, the positions of the stars, the cards upon the table, or the swing of the pendulum, or even a magic 8-ball, we as a species have concocted a myriad of methods with which we peer into the misty shadows of time, showing us what once was, is, and may yet to be. It wasn't long until fortune-telling found its way into carnivals and traveling fairs. Later on, in the penny arcades of yore, we had the likes of Princess Doraldina and Zoltan. So, eventually, fortune-telling found its way into the digital age with the popularity of video game consoles and home computers. Today, I offer you one example out of many with which you can use your video game console to divine your fate, if you so choose. Taboo, The Sixth Sense was released in April of 1989 by Trade West for the Nintendo Entertainment System. However, the game itself was actually developed by Rare. Yes, that Rare. The game itself is a party game which tells the player's fortune by way of a simulated tarot deck, with the cards arranged in a pattern known to tarot practitioners as the Celtic Cross spread. You start the game by entering your name, your birthday, and your gender. The game will then ask you to enter a question that you wish to have answered by the cards. From there, the cards are then shuffled and dealt. The game proceeds to tell you what each drawn card means relative to the order in which it was drawn and placed in the spread. After the reading, you can also have the game generate lucky numbers if you happen to live in a state where you can play the lottery. Legend has it that the game predicted the deaths of a number of players who owned a copy to such a degree that Nintendo had no choice but to pull it from the market. However, in my research, I have found those claims to be tenuous at best. The source of the urban legend comes from a very clickbaity article listing haunted and cursed video games, with no attribution as to where the legend came from. The only other source I could find was a fictional creepypasta story likely inspired by this article. I couldn't find any news stories from the time of the game's release, not even from tabloids, which thrive on sensationalized news stories. This leads me to the conclusion that this is an urban legend that never happened. However, in the spirit of the season, I've decided to conduct a little experiment. Seeing as I myself own multiple tarot decks, I've decided to ask the game 3 questions, generating 3 different readings. I then asked those exact same questions using my own cards and the exact same spread used in the game to see if the readings would be similar to one another. For this experiment, I'm using the card meanings as outlined in a tarot directory that I happen to own, using it to interpret both sets of readings, as the game's interpretations of the cards are largely incoherent. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go over every single reading and every single card and every single interpretation, as there just aren't enough hours in the day. Instead, I'm going to give you more of a broad overview of my findings as a whole. And let me be clear, I am by no means an expert on tarot readings. This is just my observations as an average layperson who happens to own a tarot deck and this game. The first question I asked concerned love and romance. Both readings predominantly featured cards from the Suit of Wands. They each brought up the fact that there are lingering anxieties and traumas from my past that are influencing my decisions. However, the final outcome of the game's reading indicates that I'd emerge as an honest and mature person, while the manual reading indicates that I would enter a period of relative calm. The second question was in regards to travel. While the game communicated that I would need to take a great risk, I would end up as a more self-sufficient person as a result. The manual reading, on the other hand, was a bit more bleak, advising that if I begin to doubt myself and remain indecisive, I would lose everything that I worked hard to build. The last question focused on wealth. Like the previous set of readings, the game presented a more optimistic outcome, while the manual reading was more negative. Both readings indicated a sense of indecisiveness and restraint. However, the game's reading indicated that I was attempting to reconnect with my emotions, while the manual reading indicated that I was afraid of my emotions. Both also indicated a need for thoughtful consideration, but the final outcome is where things diverge most strongly. The game indicates that I'll be capable of making the right decision despite some unrealistic expectations and ideals, while the manual reading advises that I may end up isolated from others as a result of pursuing my goals. Looking at these readings side by side, although they are different, there do appear to be some thematic similarities, with certain ideas and motifs coming up time and time again. This could mean that they are either two possible futures stemming from the same point, or simply two different perspectives on the same series of events. Keep in mind, though, this is by no means a scientific experiment. I am naturally coming into this with my own biases and my own perspective, and naturally I could be injecting my own logical conclusions into the interpretation process as a whole. When it comes to the game's readings, I noticed that the interpretations of the cards seem to be inconsistent with what the cards usually mean in a standard deck. The meanings generated in the game appear to be an attempt to summarize the meaning of the card in the context of the spread itself. For example, at the end of the first reading regarding love and romance, the game indicated that the final outcome would be maturity and honesty, as represented by the King of Staves, or Wands as they are usually called in most decks. However, the King of Wands usually indicates confidence and willpower, not necessarily honesty and maturity. As I mentioned, the readings the game generated tended to be a bit more positive and encouraging, whereas the manual readings with my deck were a bit more blunt. That said, I do have the added benefit of using a tarot directory to supplement the readings. The average Joe Schmo is probably not going to understand what the game is saying due to the cryptic nature of the interpretations and the grammatically questionable use of the English language. It's also hard to factor how much of an influence the question asked at the start of the in-game reading has on the reading itself beyond what is going on in the mind of the player as it's conducted. That is also the case when doing a reading with your own cards or having someone do a reading for you. What you bring into it is going to affect what you take from it. Overall, as a fun little party game for you and your friends to turn on for an evening's amusement, it's mostly inoffensive. However, if you are serious about getting into tarot, whether you want to use it to make life decisions, or if you really want to try to glimpse at your own future, you're better off buying your own deck and a tarot directory and conducting a reading for yourself, or having someone who's more well-versed in tarot doing a reading for you. That said, if you have a group of like-minded friends and want to have a nice fun evening of spooky soothsaying, you'll have a great time, provided that you do not take the readings the game generates too seriously. On that note, let me leave you with the immortal words of one Dr. Emmett Brown. Your future is not yet written. No one's is. Your future is whatever you make it, so make it good. On that note, dear viewer, I thank you for watching, and I bid thee good night.